Was this case about demonic possessions, or did people who were involved fail to treat Anneliese Michel when she needed it most? Today we're going to be taking a journey into one of the most debated exorcism cases in history. We want to know if faith can push someone over the edge into the abyss of terror. Anneliese Michel was born on September 21st, 1952 in Leibelfling, Germany. She was raised in a very strict Catholic family. She was very smart in school, and she would normally keep to herself. Now there's not much to go from there. Throughout the entire case, there's only been one friend of Anneliese, but it wasn't until the very end of the trials where she was mentioned. As far as their personal lives, and from the rest of her family, most of it was kept separate. Everything I'm about to tell you was all documented and gone through testimonies and interviews, so that's how all these came to be. And to make things easier, I've decided to make a timeline of the events from the beginning to the end to help paint a picture of how all of this went down. Starting on September 1968, Anneliese starts to experience her first episode of losing consciousness at the age of 16. She also began saying that something was pressing on her chest as if someone was sitting on her. In August of 1969, she had experienced it again, and this time, her mom had taken her to a family doctor and neurologist, Dr. Vogt and Dr. Luthi. Dr. Vogt is a family doctor, and the other is the neurologist. They ran a brain scan and found nothing wrong in her brain that would cause her to lose consciousness. So they concluded that this could lead to an epileptic seizure. Between 1970 and 1972, she had experienced 2 more episodes. In 1970, she was prescribed anticonvulsant and had another brain scan which came back normal. In 1972, she was prescribed Dilaudid and another brain scan. However, they noticed irregular patterns, but it wasn't enough to explain her symptoms. In the spring of 1973, Anneliese would hear knocking sounds coming from her room, and it was getting louder to the point where even her sisters could hear them as well. What's even more interesting is that she began hearing a voice saying that she was damned into hell. Her mother claimed that one day she caught Anneliese staring at a statue of Mary, and she said that her eyes were jet black and her hands were like animal paws with claws coming out. Later that year, Anneliese had to sit down with Dr. Luthi, who wanted to know more about her situation and started asking her about the things she'd been going through, which Anneliese would start talking about how she constantly sees demonic faces and how the devil lives inside of her. What's interesting is that Anneliese's mother claimed that Dr. Luthi suggested seeing a Jesuit. However, Dr. Luthi later on denied even ever saying that. Within that same month in September of 1973, the family became more desperate in finding a priest until one day they found a priest by the name of Father Alt. In November of that same year, a few more neurologists studied her and prescribed her with new medications more potent than the last. That's going to be important for later, so please try and remember that. 2 years later, on July of 1975, her behavior worsened in that she couldn't sleep for days and would constantly pray throughout all the night. She went even as far as to eat spiders and flies. Anything holy such as portraits, statues, and crucifixes were destroyed in the home. At one point, she even displayed superhuman strength and that she could even completely destroy an apple with one hand. After all that, a priest by the name of Father Rodwick, who was an expert of exorcisms, was truly convinced that she was indeed possessed. The exorcism was approved and that Father Runs was in charge. The other name belonged to a priest who dated back to the 15th century by the name of Valentin Fleischmann. He was kicked out from the church due to bad behavior, but this pretty much put the nail in the coffin for Father Alt in believing all this, because there's simply no way of Anneliese knowing this, which is pretty chilling if you think about it. In May of 1976, Annelise's conditions became even more serious as she started to bang her head against the wall over and over, and that she would bite herself and anybody who got too close to her. It was so bad that the family had to tie her down on her bed to prevent more damage. During this time, she wouldn't eat a thing, and when she was asked why, she would always say, "I'm not permitted to eat." She weighed under 100 pounds and yet still exhibited great strength, even when multiple people tried to hold her down. June rolled around and her face was almost entirely sinked in and refused any doctor visits. Near the end of June, another exorcism took place, and the only thing she would say was, "Please, absolution." The next day, her family found her dead in her room. The cause of death was starvation. She went through 67 exorcisms and she was only 23 years old. In 1978, Mr. and Mrs. Michel, Father Renz, and Father Alt were accused of negligence homicide. During the trial, the defense gave eyewitnesses testimonies and the tapes to prove that she was in fact possessed by demons. However, it's been stated that the court didn't take that too seriously, so the defense had to go a step further and explain that she had her lawful right to refuse medical treatment and that they were respecting her wishes. Many people believed that the only real reason why she would refuse medical treatments was that more than likely the treatments would have been the following: force feeding, tranquilizing her, and electroshock therapy. Thea Hine, who was a close friend, stated that a few months before her death, she was begging on her knees to Thea not to suggest medical treatment to anybody. Father Alt even started looking for medical help near the end of it all, and that he introduced his friend, Dr. Richard Roth, to the case. However, Dr. Richard didn't really do much. It's to my understanding he just wanted to see what the big deal was with Anneliese. What makes this interesting is that he claimed to have said that he saw no physical damage on her body and that everything was completely normal. But in an earlier statement, Father Alt said that her face was sunken in with bruises all over her body and that her cheeks were swollen. Two major contradictions that did not help them out at all. I also should mention that the autopsy report stated that her brain was healthy and that there was no damage to cause any epileptic seizures. So remember how I mentioned about the two neurologists who gave Anneliese a more potent drug? Well, the prosecutors claimed that over the years she's been pumped with so many drugs and that the priest and the family was playing along with their fantasies and by performing exorcisms wasn't doing anybody a favor. Seeing the long history of medical drugs made a huge point in court. What's even weirder is that prosecutors claim that Father Renz showed signs of schizophrenia. Their last point was that the parents and basically every adult that was associated with the case should have used better judgment and just simply take the young lady to a hospital because her mental health was so bad and it was hard for her to properly communicate with them. After all that, the court ultimately favored the prosecutors, and the parents and the priest were sentenced to 6 months in jail, 3 years of probation for the priest, and that they would all have to pay all the court costs and any fees. In the aftermath of the trial, modifications were made to the guidelines concerning the application of exorcism within the Catholic Church, resulting in an increasingly stringent and skeptical view right. The Anneliese Michel case stirred heated debates regarding belief versus skepticism and religion versus medicine that still continues even today. The legacy of Anneliese Michel is persistent, transcending national boundaries and infiltrating pop culture. It's seen in films, books, and plays, with The Exorcism of Emily Rose being the most notable example. While many view her case as a psychiatric illness misinterpreted as a demonic possession, others remain convinced of the supernatural nature of her afflictions. Even with her tragic end, Anneliese Michel's case still poses one question. Did her parents and the priest really use poor judgment, or did they do everything in their power to save her? This is the end of the video. I really do hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you and have a wonderful day.